Hello everyone, my name is Zud. Today we're going to talk about how to identify hazards. In our previous episode, we talked about what is a hazard. So simply put, a hazard is anything that can cause injury or ill health. The definition is easy, but what is not so easy is identifying all the hazards in a real workplace. So that's why we need a procedure or a method that helps us identify as many hazards as possible. And most importantly, a method that's easy enough for our frontline workers to use. I've put together a simple step-by-step approach for hazard identification that you can use as a reference. The first step is to define the work area and the task. When defining the task, there are two important things to keep in mind. First, not only focus on the routine work, we should also think about the non-routine tasks, like jobs performed occasionally or temporarily. And second, think about the tasks under three different conditions, including normal conditions, abnormal conditions. For example, work's done when equipment fails or something goes wrong, and emergency conditions, such as emergency response or rescue work after an accident. Because work activities under these three conditions could be different, so the hazards involved are not exactly the same. Once a job or task is clearly defined, our next step is list everything that is involved in the job, all the equipment, materials, and tools. When we talk about the materials here, it includes all the raw materials, finished products or semi-finished products, as well as any chemicals used in the task. And why do we do this? Because this list works like a hazard identification checklist. It helps us look at each item one by one so we don't miss any hazards. Now we've got the list, and then we can identify hazards. In general, there are two simple ways to do that. The first one, which is step 3, is to start from the items on the list. We look at each piece of equipment or material, tools, and ask a simple question. Could it become a hazard that causes injury or harm when we use it? And the second one is step 4, which is to work backwards from the injury. We first think about what kind of injury or harm could happen in the task, and then we ask a question, what hazard could cause this injury? So by using both methods together, we can identify hazards more completely and reduce chances of missing anything. All right, let's start with the step 3, which is identifying hazards based on the items on the list. Most of the time, especially for our workers, they identify hazards based on their personal experience and common sense. That works, but sometimes those less obvious hazards can get overlooked. So if you want to be more thorough, a very useful method is to identify hazards based on the energy involved. There's a theory called energy transfer theory. You may have heard of it. The basic idea of this theory is that an accident happens when uncontrolled energy is transferred to the human body in an excessive way and causes injury. So, if you're looking at the piece of equipment and ask, what kind of energy does it have? We are basically looking for the sources of the injury, which are, in other words, the hazards. In the workplace, the items that we listed earlier usually involves a few common types of energy, like mechanical or kinetic energy, which exists in moving equipment or moving parts of the equipment. We have electrical energy, which is commonly found in energized equipment or machinery, power distribution systems, and static electricity. And thermal energy includes both high and low temperatures. Pressure energy is commonly associated with pneumatic and hydraulic systems in the workplace. And chemical energy is present, for example, in flammable and explosive substances. And also we've got potential energy, which exists when walking at heights or during lifting operations where people or loads could fall due to gravity. So when we go over our equipment, materials, or tools through the lens of all these types of energy, hazards are much easier to spot. We've actually identified most of the hazards when we finish the step 3. However, there can be still some hazards that we've missed, so that's why we need step 4 to fill in the gaps by identifying hazards based on the accident. So how do we do that? Instead of start with the hazards, we start with the accident themselves, and we can refer to GBT 6441, Classification and Coding of Work Safety Accidents. This is the latest version, the latest draft version, and it expands the number of accidents from 20 to 29. So it's just a draft. It's not officially released, but it can still be a very useful reference. So in step 4, instead of looking for the hazards right away, we think about whether this task can involve, for example, mechanical injury or electric shock or fires or other types of accident. And then we ask, what could cause these accidents? And these direct causes are the hazards that we may have missed. The final step is identifying occupational hazards. In the definition of hazards, there are 2 possible outcomes: injury and ill health. So during the step 3 and 4, we mainly focused on the hazards that can cause injury, and there are also some hazards that can cause health problems. So these are called occupational hazards. And this step is quite simple. We can just refer to this document, the classification of occupational hazards, the 2015 version, and check whether any of these hazards exist in the job. And here I've also added ergonomic hazards, which are not in the document. And ergonomic hazards include things like awkward postures, repetitive movements, excessive force, and prolonged static work. And over time, these can lead to musculoskeletal disorders. So we add the occupational hazards in the final step, and by doing so, the hazard identification becomes much more complete. Okay, that's it for today. Thanks for listening. And if you are interested in learning English for EHS, please feel free to scan this QR code and join our group. All right, I'll see you in the next one.